Most women, in their aching tenderness and radiant capacity for love, believe they can reach the broken parts of a man and mend them with devotion. They don't see it as rescuing. They see it as loving harder. They see it as standing by someone whose soul, perhaps like theirs once was, has been covered in soot and silence. But the more she pours herself into healing him, the more he recoils, like a wounded wolf snarling at the very hand offering salvation. He begins to pull away not because he doesn't feel her love. No, it's precisely because he does. Her gaze sees too much. Her affection unearths what he has spent years burying. She believes she is offering balm, but he feels her fingers pulling at the bandages he's wrapped so tightly, afraid of what might leak out. The feminine impulse to nurture is sacred. Archetypally, she is the great mother, the healer, the guide, the keeper of hearts. But when this nurturing force is projected onto a man who has not yet faced his own shadows, it becomes a mirror he cannot bear. Because deep within him is a boy who was once unseen, perhaps unloved. And now this woman, radiant, strong, intuitive, dares to peer into the abyss he calls his soul. To him, this is not intimacy. It is intrusion. Her love feels like exposure. Her attempts to understand feel like surveillance. And in his unevolved state, still ruled by ego and fear, he will mistake her grace for control. He will call her intensity too much, her honesty overwhelming, her care suffocating. But what he's truly afraid of is not her. It's himself. It is the confrontation with his own inadequacy, the reckoning with the part of him that never grew into manhood, the part that wants a woman to mother him while resenting her for doing so. And so he distances. Silently, subtly at first. Responding less. Shrinking into tasks, distractions, work, avoidance. He convinces himself that he needs space, that she's the one demanding too much. But what he's really doing is escaping the demand to evolve. And you, if you are the woman in this dynamic, you begin to question yourself. You wonder what you did wrong. You soften further, give more, hoping he'll feel safe enough to return. You become less of yourself in hopes that he'll become more of who he was. You abandon your own needs to meet the emptiness in his eyes. But here is the painful truth: no matter how much light you pour into him, it will never be enough to illuminate a man who refuses to open his eyes. Because healing is not something you can do to another. It is something they must choose, and choosing healing means choosing pain. Choosing to sit with the wounds, the shame, the neglected corners of the soul. And not every man is ready. Jung spoke of the shadow, the unconscious, repressed elements of the psyche that dictate our behaviors until we bring them into the light. When you try to fix a man who has not integrated his shadow, you become a threat to the structure of self he has built on avoidance. He does not want to dismantle the fragile house of cards he calls identity. He just wants you to stay, love him as he is, and never ask him to look in the mirror. But the feminine essence sees mirrors everywhere. She reflects. She senses. She feels the emotional truth beneath words, hears the pain behind the silence. She cannot unsee what her soul perceives. And this is her power, but also her burden. And if she is not careful, she will turn this sacred sight against herself. She will take his pulling away as proof of her inadequacy. She will internalize his resistance as a challenge, as though her love must earn its worth through his transformation. But love is not proof. And healing is not a prize. You are not here to be his therapist. You are not here to perform emotional labor he refuses to do. You are not here to mother a man who still wants to be a boy. The more you try to fix him, the more you confirm to him, and to yourself, that something is broken. The more you chase his healing, the more you abandon your own. And so, he pulls away. Not just from you, but from the mirror of his own becoming. But there is something deeper beneath this retreat, a primal tension that lives at the root of masculine and feminine polarity. The wounded masculine is terrified of the feminine not because she is weak, but because she is a mirror of his unmet potential. She embodies feeling, depth, surrender, all the things he has been taught to suppress. And when she comes close, when she dares to love him into wholeness, he feels the unbearable pressure to become someone he has never been. It is not that he does not care. It is that he cannot yet carry the weight of being fully seen. So he leaves in small ways first. Maybe with sarcasm, with dismissive silence, with avoiding eye contact after a vulnerable moment. He'll start to mock what he once admired in her intuition, her sensitivity, her depth. He'll call it drama or overthinking. But this is not truth, this is projection. This is his inner boy, terrified of being called into accountability, disguising his fear as cynicism. And still, she tries. Because the feminine learns love as devotion. She confuses stillness with patience, withdrawal with mystery, silence with depth. She thinks if she just holds on long enough, if she just believes enough, he'll rise to meet her in the fire. But he can't, not until he chooses it. Not until the man inside him defeats the boy who clings to his defenses. Here's the great paradox of healing dynamics. The more you try to carry someone who refuses to walk, the more you begin to limp. You will call it loyalty. You will call it unconditional love. But what it becomes is martyrdom. You bleed out to prove that love is real, forgetting that love is not measured in sacrifice, it is measured in resonance. You are not meant to be consumed in his healing. You are meant to be a flame that shows him his own capacity to burn, not to do the burning for him. And here, the Jungian path of individuation whispers a sacred truth: you cannot awaken someone else's soul at the cost of silencing your own. The journey inward is solitary. No matter how much you wish to walk it with him, you cannot drag him towards self-awareness. Each man must confront his shadow alone. Each woman must decide how long she is willing to wait at the door of a man's unconscious while he pretends he doesn't hear the knocking. He pulls away because intimacy demands death, the death of the false self, the fragile ego, the mask of masculinity built on performance and control. And unless he has begun his descent into that death, your presence feels like threat, not comfort. When you offer love to a man not ready to receive it, it is like pouring spring water into a closed fist. It spills, it scatters. Not because the water lacks purity, but because the vessel cannot yet open. And yet, there's something else. Something even more haunting. Some women become addicted to the ache of almost. The thrill of proximity to transformation. The spiritual tension of loving a man with potential. They become entangled in the drama of becoming his lighthouse, secretly hoping that their presence will one day awaken the man he was always meant to be. But that isn't love. That is hope masquerading as devotion. That is trauma bonding dressed in soul work. That is a little girl's dream of saving daddy, reenacted in the body of a grown woman. And you who is listening, you who knows the feeling of holding space for a man while you slowly lose yourself, you must ask, is this love, or is this a plea for validation? Are you nurturing him, or are you bargaining with your own abandonment wounds? Because a healed woman does not rescue. She reflects. She does not chase. She magnetizes. She does not fix. She inspires. And if he pulls away, she does not collapse. She does not beg. She does not shrink into a more digestible version of herself. She stands, soft yet immovable, as the storm that reminds him of his own chaos. As the sea he cannot conquer, only surrender to. And should he choose to walk away from her depth, she lets him. Because to betray herself in pursuit of someone else's awakening is the ultimate disempowerment. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when a woman who has tried to fix, to soften, to shrink herself for the sake of love, begins to wake up. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting alone in the middle of the night, staring at the wall, realizing she's been speaking into silence for months. Realizing that her needs have become negotiations. That her softness has turned to sorrow. That she's been living in the waiting room of someone else's healing. That's when something ancient stirs within her. Not rage, exactly, though that may come later. First, it's clarity. A voice, buried deep beneath years of conditioning, begins to rise. The voice of the inner woman. The sovereign. The one who remembers. She remembers what it felt like to be full. Before she became a contortionist for a man who could never meet her where she stood. She remembers her laughter when it wasn't stifled by eggshells. She remembers her power before she made it small enough to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. This moment, this remembering, is the birth of detachment. Not the cold kind, not the punishing kind, but the sacred detachment that comes from knowing you were never meant to fix anyone, only to walk beside them if they choose to rise. Detachment is not indifference. It is the release of illusion, the relinquishment of control, the surrender of the savior archetype. Because the feminine that tries to fix is not in her power, she is in her wound. She is the maiden still trying to earn love through service. She is the child who once believed that if she could just be perfect enough, helpful enough, good enough, she would be safe. She would be kept. She would be chosen. But the woman who awakens no longer seeks to be chosen, she chooses. And she chooses herself, again and again, until her self-worth is no longer negotiable. This is the individuation Jung spoke of, the becoming of the whole self, not through the approval of another, but through integration of all one's parts. Light and shadow. Love and boundary. Desire and discernment. And here's the thing, when you stop trying to fix him, something profound happens. The dynamic breaks. The energetic contract you both unconsciously signed, you as healer, him as victim, begins to dissolve. And in that dissolution, truth is revealed. Because when a man loses the woman who once devoted her entire soul to repairing he is left with nothing but his own reflection. And for some men, this is the catalyst they need. For others, it is their final escape. But either way, it is not your responsibility. You were never meant to be the scaffolding for his becoming. You are not his therapist. You are not his spiritual crutch. You are not a container for the pain he refuses to hold. You are a woman. And a woman is not a fix. She is a force. When you stop chasing his transformation, you begin your own. The energy you once poured into decoding his silence now nourishes your own clarity. The sleepless nights you once spent wondering how to reach him now become sacred time spent reaching yourself. The dreams you postponed for his comfort now bloom in the sunlight of your own becoming. You realize, the more you tried to fix him, the more you abandoned yourself. The more you twisted to fit into his limitations, the more you betrayed your own expansion. The more you begged to be heard, the more you silenced your own knowing. And now, no more. Now, you rise. You rise not with resentment, but with reverence. For the lesson. For the loss. For the love you gave, even when it was not returned. Because you finally see, your love was never the problem. Your depth was never too much. Your truth was never a burden. It simply arrived in the wrong story, one where the man wasn't ready for the heroine's fire. And so, as you rise, you begin to see him, truly see him, not as the man you hoped he could become, but as he is. Stripped of potential. Free of projection. You see the boy beneath the surface, still hiding behind detachment and deflection, still waging a quiet war against intimacy. You see the patterns, not with judgment, but with distance. And for the first time, you do not rush in to soothe him. You do not offer yourself up as a salve for wounds he won't acknowledge. You simply stand there, whole, unmoved, awake. This is the sacred return to yourself. The moment when the need to be enough for him dissolves into the certainty that you've always been enough for you. But do not mistake this return for ease. It is not a gentle homecoming. It is a reckoning. Because to release your role as fixer is to confront the part of you that needed to fix. The part that felt powerful only when needed. The part that equated sacrifice with value. That linked exhaustion to worthiness. That secretly believed that if she could just be indispensable to a broken man, she would finally feel whole. But you are not whole because you are needed. You are whole because you exist. And now the energy begins to shift. No longer pouring into him, into the black hole of his unconscious avoidance, your energy flows inward. You begin to feel what you've been missing, yourself. Your essence. Your rhythm. You remember what your laughter sounds like when it's not trying to rescue. What your voice feels like when it's not filtered through fear of rejection. What your boundaries look like when they are not just lines, but altars. You begin to rebuild. Not a new version of yourself for someone else, but the woman you were before you were taught that love meant proving, pleading, or persevering through pain. You become sovereign. And with sovereignty comes clarity and compassion. Not just for yourself, but for him. Because now you understand, his pulling away was never about you. It was about his own terror of being seen. Of being truly met. Of being held accountable for his own healing. And yet you no longer need to change that. You no longer bargain with your love. You no longer offer it as currency. You no longer audition for affection from a man who flinches at the very depth you embody. Because your love is not a tool. It is a temple. And temples are not carried to those who will not enter. They remain rooted, magnetic, radiant, drawing only those with the courage to kneel in reverence. So now, when he comes back, as many do, you do not run toward him. You do not soften your edges in hope. You do not lower your standards in memory. You simply watch. Because now you know, a man's return is not a sign of change. Only his actions prove evolution. Only his willingness to meet his own reflection, without using you as the buffer, shows readiness. And if he has not yet faced the darkness inside him, you do not become the light to guide him. You become the light that blinds him, until he learns to see with his own eyes. There is a deep power in knowing that you can love someone and still walk away. That you can hold space for their humanity without sacrificing your divinity. That you can forgive them without re-inviting them into the sacredness of your energy. This is the final stage of detachment, when your love no longer binds, but blesses, from afar. You bless him not because he changed, but because you did. You bless the pain for what it taught you. You bless the silence for what it revealed. You bless the unraveling, because it led you back to yourself. She chooses with discernment now, not out of desperation, not from the hollow hunger of abandonment wounds, but from the rooted stillness of a woman who has returned to her own soul. There is no clamor in her love anymore. No proving. No performing. Her presence no longer hinges on being needed, it simply is, vast and steady as the ocean tide. And so, when she stands at the edge of connection again, perhaps with him, perhaps with another, she does not extend herself blindly. She does not offer her depths in exchange for breadcrumbs. She does not ask, "Will you choose me?" but instead wonders, "Do you have the capacity to stand beside me without fear?" Because now, she knows, you cannot drag someone into their wholeness. You cannot love them into maturity. You cannot fix what they have built their identity around avoiding. You can only become so whole, so radiant in your own being, that anything less than reciprocal devotion no longer feels like love, it feels like starvation. And in that moment of clarity, something powerful dies within her. The myth. The hope. The ache of almost. She buries it, not with bitterness, but with reverence. She thanks it for what it taught her, how to see herself. How to listen when her heart whispered this is not enough. How to walk away even while she still loved. Because true love, she knows now, does not pull away when things get real. It stays. It breathes. It grows. It leans in. It faces discomfort with courage and truth. It says, "I will meet you there, in the fire, not to save you, but to stand with you. Anything less is not love, it is fear in disguise. And she no longer bargains with fear. This is what liberation feels like. Not freedom from love, but freedom within it. To love without attachment. To give without depletion. To walk away without collapse. She no longer twists into something digestible. She no longer minimizes her knowing. She no longer waits for a man to wake up before she decides she's worthy of being held. Because she holds herself now. In her arms, the little girl who once begged to be seen is finally safe. In her presence, the woman who once tried to fix has been reborn, not harder, not colder, but clearer. Softer at the core, stronger at the edges. And fiercely unwilling to sacrifice herself at the altar of someone else's potential. She understands now that love is not a mission, it is a meeting. That her role was never to be the bridge to someone else's growth, but the guardian of her own peace. She no longer confuses a man's resistance with depth. No longer turns distance into meaning. No longer worships the idea of what could be more than the reality of what is. And when, or if, he ever does return, awakened, open, ready to meet her in truth, she will not be waiting. She will be living. And perhaps, in the vastness of her becoming, their paths will cross again, not out of need, not out of unfinished stories, but out of mutual respect and conscious love. But even if they don't, she is whole. She is home. She is the woman who no longer tries to fix. Who no longer tries to be chosen. Who no longer fears the silence of her own company. Because she is the silence. She is the storm. She is the stillness after. She is the fire, the flood, the rebirth. And now she knows. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. There is a quiet power in a woman who no longer seeks to be understood by those who cannot meet her. She no longer performs her softness for the sake of earning space. She no longer cries into empty echoes. She no longer whispers her needs, hoping they will not scare him away. Because she has come to understand the most liberating truth of all: if your truth scares someone, let them be afraid. A man who pulls away when faced with your depth is not your failure. He is your mirror. A reflection of every place within you that still believed love had to be earned through endurance. A reflection of your former self, the one who stayed too long, gave too much, and expected too little. But now, you see with new eyes. Eyes that do not mistake potential for presence. Eyes that see red flags not as challenges, but as prophecies. Eyes that no longer look for validation, but for alignment, for the soul who does not flinch when the feminine speaks her truth, cries her rage, dances her chaos, or softens into her surrender. Because the woman who no longer tries to fix, who no longer waits in quiet agony for the man to rise, is no longer trapped in the archetype of the wounded healer. She has entered a new realm, that of the initiated feminine. The wild woman. The queen. The one who does not kneel unless it is in reverence for something greater than pain. She has embraced her own shadow. She has met the part of her that once clung. That once feared abandonment more than self-betrayal. That once equated longing with love. And she has burned it to the ground. Now, when a man withdraws, she does not chase. She observes. She lets him choose. She lets him reveal himself in absence, because she knows that silence is a language, too. And in that silence, she listens. Not to him, but to herself. She listens to the ache in her chest that no longer wants to ache. To the intuition that no longer wants to be ignored. To the dreams she buried beneath his comfort. To the truth she knew all along but feared to name, that love without reciprocity is not noble, it is neglect. So she stops fixing. She stops pouring. She stops waiting. And life begins to move again. Her body unfreezes. Her mind clears. Her voice deepens. She begins to create, to dance, to speak, to be. not for someone else, not in hopes of being chosen, but because her existence is reason enough. And in her fullness, she becomes magnetic, not to every man, but to the right man, the one who does not shrink before her wholeness, the one who has done the work of facing his own shadow, the one who does not need her to be smaller so that he can feel big, the one who meets her as an equal, not a project, as a partner, not a patient. This is the sacred polarity, not of dominance and submission, but of wholeness meeting wholeness, of healed masculine standing beside empowered feminine, not to fix, not to complete, but to co-create. And she, the woman who once tried to fix, now sees that her true power was never in her capacity to heal others, but in her decision to heal herself first. Because when the feminine heals, she no longer uses love as a weapon or a leash. She no longer fears being alone, because she has finally befriended her solitude. She no longer grieves the ones who could not meet her, because she sees their absence as protection. She rises, not to be above, but to be whole. And from that wholeness, she chooses.